Hey everyone, and welcome to Motion Tutorials, where we go over weekly topics in motion graphics, VFX, and 3D animation. I'm your host, Sean Frangella, and this week we have a really fun title sequence tutorial going over how to recreate the titles seen in the movie Mad Max Fury Road that's been running lately at the time of this tutorial, or is super old if you're watching this in the future. And if you're watching this in the future, then we're probably out of gas and there's bigger problems going on, if there's already the trucks exploding and things like that. So this is a pretty fun one to put together. It's a little different than some of the things I do. We got a lot of textures and kind of this fun grittiness, and there's these little flecks of stuff animating inside the letters. So we'll do some cool stuff for this in After Effects. And if we take a look at our After Effects project file with this animating, we got a textured background and some texture on top of it, our cool widescreen bars, our text, of course. And what's building this a lot is these cool texture overlays on these nice track mats that are setting up and lining up within After Effects, and all snapping it right onto our text animation that's pulling in with the camera in 3D. And we even got some little particles going on inside of there that you can see floating around there that really elevate this and make it a little more complex than just a basic text animation. So this is what we'll work towards. It's in this comp called Awesome Title Sequence. You can call it whatever you want. So let's just get started right away. I'm gonna make a new composition, and maybe I'll call this one Super Neat Title Sequence. You can call it Great Title Sequence or Mediocre Title Sequence if you feel like you're not having just an okay day. And I'll do it 1920 by 1080. And just leave it at 30 seconds. We'll probably only use 4 seconds, but that's fine. And I'll go to OK. And the first thing I'm going to do is make a new solid. I'll call this BG. And on this, I'm going to grab the effect gradient ramp by typing in ramp, and I'll drop that on. And we can keep black on the top, and on the bottom, we want kind of a dark red. And that's going to look good. Now, what I have for the texture to start with is a couple of these basic paper overlays that I've had forever from online. We got some gritty paper, some scans of old books and stuff. And you can find stuff like this online, or you could just take pictures of old books. That'll work. So what I can do on top of this is I'll drag in this tan paper, and I'll press R for rotation and rotate it 90 degrees. And then I kind of want to flip it so this little crease is on the bottom. So if I do scale and unlock these, I'll put X at -100. And since it's rotated, that'll flip it to the bottom. There's also an effect called flip and flip flop that'll do that. Any way to get this lined up how I want. So then what I can do is just scale this a little more, just so it really fills up my frame here. We'll just pull that down a little. And then I want to use a blending mode to get it to blend in. And we can go through all those. You can press Shift plus and minus to kind of cycle through them really quickly, which is a fun little shortcut to not have to actually know what these do. And I kind of like how soft light or divide works. So we'll go with that, but I need it to pop a little more. So what I can do is get curves, and I'll throw curves effect on it and just really pull this contrast up a bit and just kind of twist this around, and that gives us a nice extra amount of contrast. We can really see that crack. And if I want to push it a little further, since this is tan, if I go grab the effect hue saturation, and I'll just drop that on before curves and just pull the saturation out, that'll brighten it up a bit too with how the blending mode's working. And I can just tweak those couple effects to kind of get a little bit of that grittiness in there. Now we need some widescreen bars. There's lots of different ways you could do that. A quick way to make super awesome widescreen bars in a couple seconds is if we make a new solid. I'll call this bars. That'll give me a black shape, and I'll double click on the rectangle, and that's going to make a mask on this. And then I can grab the edges and hold Command or Control to evenly snap those in. And on this mask, I'll do invert, and boom, we got some super quick widescreen or super widescreen bars. That's going to block that out just like how we want it. And then I could just lock that layer because that's all we're going to use that for on top of our competition. Now, the main thing to start is our text. So what I'm going to do is just get my text tool. And I was looking online trying to figure out a font close to this. And I found the font Florida Cereal Black, which looked pretty close to the movie title. They might have used something a little different, but this is a nice blocky font, and I'll just type in the word mad in capital and go to paragraph and center that. Make sure my kerning is at 0 and maybe pull that up a little so the letters separate. Scale up that text, put it towards the middle and get it to about fit. And then to snap it to the center, what I can do is just go to Window Align, and that'll open this little alignment window, and I can snap this to both centers of the composition, pull it up into the center, and then I know it's exactly centered. And I'll just make this kind of a dark brown, and that's going to get us close to the color that we want in our example. And then to get the second word, I'm just going to duplicate this with Edit, Duplicate, or Command D. Drag this down, type in max. I'll just scale this up a little bit just so it exactly matches. And I can jump in here and use Option or Alt left and right brackets, really just adjust this kerning a little more, and hold Command while I'm dragging to very slowly scale this, just so I can get it exactly lining up, because it bugged me and drive me crazy. And then I'll just duplicate that again, drag that down, type in Fury Road or whatever title you want to use in this. Maybe take all of the kerning in and just scale this one down just so it fits nicely. And that gets us our main text. And I can just grab all these and just center them in my composition a bit. And now what I want to start is get some texture and some basic little grit on this. And what I can do for one layer of that is grab another one of these paper overlays, and I'll drag this on top of this and scale that down quite a bit, just so it's covering the whole letters. And then I'll use a blending mode on that. I'm going to grab Overlay. It's a pretty nice one. So maybe I'd grab Curves and kind of just boost the contrast there. And I kind of lost my letters, so I might have gone a little too dark. What we want to do is get kind of like a brownish, reddish color, and that texture will then blend with that. So about there's a little better. And if I just want to dump this same change onto the other layers, I can select this hex code and do Command C to copy, and then just open the color picker on the other ones and paste. And then same thing in the other one. That's a little better. So then for a paper overlay, I'll kind of bring this in, unlock X and Y, and just scale it to about the size of the edges. That's looking pretty good. Now I want it to only be within these 3 edges, and we have 3 different objects. So what I need to do is create a track mat for all of these. And to do that all at once, I could just duplicate all 3 of them, and I'll drag this above the paper texture. And then I'm going to pre-compose all 3 of those by doing right click, pre-compose, or Command Shift C. And let's do text container. And then for that paper overlay, I can set that to track mat alpha, and it's going to knock out that text in that layer and hide that. So that's awesome. That's what I want. Now we want to keep going, add some more of this kind of grit and grime. And rather than trying to do that all in After Effects and get kind of a little more custom with it, what we can do is save a still of this by doing composition, save frame as file. And I'll grab best settings, save it as a JPEG sequence, and we're just going to save 1 frame. And I'll just call this a super neat title sequence still, render that out. And then I'll go into Finder and grab that. And what I like to do for this sort of thing is bring it into Photoshop. And rather than trying to do everything with paper textures, we can create some really custom looking grit and grime on this with that kind of blood look pretty quickly, and randomize it a bit by using brushes. So I'll make a new layer in Photoshop, and I'll call this grit. And I'll get my brush tool over here, or press B, change this color to kind of that dark red. And then I have a bunch of random Photoshop brushes of grit and grime, and you can get some of this stuff online. And if I just click, it's going to make it all the same size, and that looks kind of boring. So I'll just undo those. What I can do to really randomize this is really take advantage of a lot of these brush tip shape settings. So if I check on shape dynamics, if I had a tablet plugged in, I could change the size and angle and all that stuff on pen pressure. Even if I'm at the mouse, so if I just turn up size jitter and things like angle jitter, it's going to automatically rotate and resize this every time. And then it helps with the randomness a bit. And I could even quickly delete all that and turn things on like wet edges, where it'll get a little more painterly looks. Check on things like buildup. And this will help us really get kind of a more unique one. And then we're just going to want to do all sorts of brushes around this. We'll do kind of this first one in this dark red and just get all sorts of different shapes. And since we have it on random, even if we click and scroll down, it's still going to kind of hit different points. And I just want to kind of create enough to where it's around the edges and the top, and really just fill in this and maybe make a couple layers. Call this edges, grab a lighter red, put it below that grit layer, and just create kind of different and organic grit by just dragging all over the place. And if I go a little overboard, which I tend to do, I kind of like to put more in, and then I can always make a mask with this tool, flip these colors so I'm drawing with black, and just kind of paint some of those back out. And if I want to just grab a bigger brush, kind of any of these work, just kind of get rid of some of those, and that's going to balance that out. So we'll do that for a while, get all sorts of grit. I'll hide this, and we end up with this. And what we want to do is save this as a transparent PNG, which we can do by file, save for web. And we'll press enter, and we want to make sure it's on PNG 24 so we get that transparency. And then I'll save this as grime layer 02 because I already did one. And then back in After Effects, we can bring that in. And I had one that I did before this that it spent a little more time kind of clicking in and drawing some of this paint, and we end up with this. So I'll just bring that on top of here and just scale this down to where it's fitting on the edges of the text. And what we can do is use the same track mat from the paper texture. So I'll just duplicate that whole track mat, put it above that grime layer, set this grime layer to alpha matte, and then that's going to snap that straight within those layers. So even if I need to make adjustments, I'm going to scale it up and move it a little, it's going to stay within those layers, and that's great. That's what we want. Now this is coming together pretty quickly. We're doing a lot of cool stuff, and it's looking pretty close. The last couple things we want to do is create a camera to very easily get that zooming in animation. And then we can get really fancy and add some custom particles floating around in that with Trapcode Particular. So to get all this easily animating in, I'll make a new camera. I'll make sure this is on 50 and drop that in. It's going to tell me I need 3D layers because I don't have any. And then I'm going to make everything except those widescreen bars 3D. And now if I get my camera tools or press C to cycle through them, if I just push the camera in, you can see that we're getting this nice zoom. So I'll go to 4 seconds, and then I want to set keyframes on position and point of interest, which I can pull up by pressing P and Shift A. And I'll check those on, push the camera in, and I can press C to cycle through and get kind of until I get my pan tool and just pull that so it's centered. And then I'll just go to the beginning and do the opposite, get my zoom in, get my track in Z camera tool, and just pull this back out to where we started. And then we'll get this nice smooth camera animation, and since everything is 3D, those track mats will lock and follow along. And if we press 0 to RAM preview, we can see that we're already pretty much there. We get this nice little gritty animation building up all these layers and our smooth little camera move. But let's really bring this up a level. You can see on the final one, in addition to all this stuff, there's these little grime flecks kind of floating around through the letters, and it's not just a texture scaling, they're kind of moving around on their own. So let's do that with Trapcode Particular, because it's one of my favorite tools. You can do tons of stuff with it. I'll get that by going to Layer, New, Solid. I'll call this Particles, and make it a different color just for my own reference. And then I'm gonna type in Particular. And Trapcode Particular is an extra plugin by Red Giant. You can get that from their site or using the Amazon affiliate link in the description of this video. It's a really great plugin. I use it for all sorts of stuff. So be sure to pick that up if you want to add this first part. And if you don't have it, no big deal. You're already pretty close before this, and this is just kind of finishing touches. So I'll drag that on, and it's going to give me this default emitter, which does not look anything like what we want. And what we want to do is go to emitter, and I'll change this emitter type from point to box. And then I'll scale this on X and Y so it fills up the letters. And then on Z, I can just put this at 1 because I don't need it to be out in Z space at all. And that's going to get them mostly sitting in there. And if we go to the beginning, there aren't any yet. So what we want to do is go to emission extras, pre-run, and turn that all the way up. And then it's going to have particles at the beginning. And I don't need that many particles. I really only need like 5 or 10 probably. So I'll set this to 10 for now. And then I'm going to go to particle. And this is where we're going to do most of the work. So we need to make it kind of this little gritty, grimy shape like we see on some of those textures we made. So what I'm going to do is make the lifespan really high, like 30, so they don't ever disappear, because we don't want particles being generated and dropping off. So I'm kind of floating around. And for particle type, I'll change this to cloudlet. And that's going to give us this little kind of abstract round shape. And I'll just take the cloud feather down to 0. So it looks more like that. And maybe take the size down a little bit to 4. And then just randomize the size a bit, maybe even smaller to 3. And then I want to make them a similar dark red under color. So just go grab a dark red. And if we want that to vary a bit, what we can do is go to color random and just turn this up a little. And it's going to get just different hints of that red hue. If we just solo this layer, we can kind of see what we're doing with the particle. And then one thing I want to do with opacity is just open up opacity over life and draw this little meter up, just so in case they're coming on, they don't just suddenly pop in, they'll just fade in. And now if we play, we can see they're kind of floating around, but they just look like they're flying all over the place. We want a little bit of randomness in that, and we want them to go a specific direction. And we can do all that under the next section that we get into by adjusting physics. And we only need to change a couple settings here to kind of do what we want. What I want to do is have gravity go negative. So if I do like -15 and play, they're going to float up. And it might be a little too much. I might need to tone that down a little bit, see what that looks like. It's a little too fast. So maybe we go like gravity -5 or 8 or about there. And then if we want them to go a specific direction, we can turn on wind, X or Y. So I'll just do some negative wind. And then they'll go up and to the left, and that's cool. And if we want to add a little bit of randomness so they're not just going straight up and to the left, we can twirl down this turbulence field and turn on effect position quite a bit. And if we check on visualize fields, you can see it's this line that's kind of rotating and moving around, and that's what's going to kind of blow them a little around so they're not just going in straight lines. I'll just turn off visualize fields. And now if I just RAM preview those particle layers, we can see that we get some nice little animation of those floating around. And we might not even need that many. I can go to emitter, and we probably only need like 5 because we just need a few in there, just so you notice that it's not only textures moving around. And then I can unsolo that, and I'll put that below my grime layer. And then I just need a similar track matte. So I'll duplicate this whole text container track matte, put that above my particles layer, and same thing on particles, change that to alpha matte. And then it's going to contain those particles to only this little track matte. So using track mattes is a big theme of this one. You can really do a lot with it. And then if we do a quick RAM preview and take a look at this, now we got everything working. It's zooming in with our camera, and we get these extra little flecks of grime and grit, and they're moving around inside the letters. And since Particular is a 3D system, we don't need to check on 3D layer. It's already going to work. And there we have it. We have the whole logo, adding in a lot of grit and grime with some textures, as well as some custom Photoshop stuff and Trapcode Particular. And this was a super fun one, getting kind of some grit and grime in these tutorials. And my brother's a huge Road Warrior fan, so hopefully he's as pumped if he sat through this thing. And I hope you are excited about it too and learned a lot with this one. What do you guys think of this technique? Do you think we came pretty close? Did a good job? Think we should start over and do it a different way? And if you have any ideas or requests for what title animation I should do next, you can hit me up on Twitter at Sean Frangella, and be sure to like the Facebook page at facebook.com/Vital. And if you want access to project files, hangouts, and all sorts of bonus content, be sure to check out patreon.com/Sean Frangella. Thanks for watching, and I will see you at the next video. Do you like watching these tutorials and want to see more episodes more often? You can help keep the show going by lending your support on Patreon at patreon.com/SeanFrangella. More importantly, if you want to throw in a couple extra bucks, you can get bonus content like project files used in the tutorials, answers to direct questions, live hangouts for questions, and even request specific tutorial topics for me to use for my next video. Also be sure to subscribe to the show by clicking the subscribe button or visiting the show homepage at youtube.com/SeanFrangella. And if you're hip with social media and have a question about this tutorial, you can find me on Twitter at SeanFrangella. As always, thanks for watching, and I will see you at the next video.